think it's been long enough. So great thing is that for everyone that joins us a little bit late, we will always have the recording available. We'll send it over to everyone so that you guys can see it from the beginning. All good. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Daniel. I'm the VP of Technology for White Media. I've been in the digital marketing industry for almost a decade, and I've been a part of White for about 9 years. So excited to go ahead and be your host today. And with me, I have a very exciting host with us today. So Nick, do you want to go ahead and give yourself a bit of an intro?
Sure. What's going on, guys? My name is Nick Young. I am the co-founder of Marketplace Ops, an agency that helps brands scale and grow on Amazon and Walmart. Our main focus is really Amazon, but we've been selling on Amazon since 2014 and primarily work with a lot of CPG brands, to expose or accelerate their exposure on these platforms.
Amazing, Nick. Thank you very much. And we have some really cool topics to cover on Amazon today. So the topics that we're going to cover this morning, we have a couple. So first of all, we're going to talk about streamlining your approach to digital marketing. And it's not necessarily about only automating projects or different workflows within your business, but it's about utilizing technology, embracing it, and finding different business processes within your organization where you can implement or plug and play some technology to then basically make your process a little bit simpler to use. It's also about finding ways to do certain tasks that you're maybe not doing today. So for example, looking at the buyer's journey, seeing where there's some gaps in your process. Are you basically having touch points on all the different steps of this buyer's journey? And if not, then where can you do it either manually or through some sort of a tool that can help you with that. And then also talking about how to leverage data to make some decisions or actually leverage data within your tools so that certain things can happen in an automated way. We're going to talk about topic number 2, which is to increase sales, not only for your clients, but also for your agency as well. So if you're having some trouble acquiring new customers, then let's talk about how your agency can use certain technology platforms out there, specifically Martech, to help you boost your sales in that way. Personalize the messaging on the buyer's journey. We're going to talk about using reporting to connect all of these pieces together and provide a combined and unified messaging. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about Amazon, which is one of the fastest growing platforms out there in terms of e-commerce success. So we're going to have Nick talk to us a lot about how to approach selling on Amazon. What are some of the different tools that you can use and some of the success strategies that he has implemented within his agency to do these things. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So what are we trying to do today? So what we're trying to do right now is we're going to cover what are some of the different things that you could do to overcome some of the most common challenges. And so, for example, what are some of the things that you run into typically? It's okay, well, how do I generate more leads? How do I get more engagement from clients? How do I combine information from different data sources, right? And nowadays there's so many different places where you can have a touch point with your customer. You have the website, you have social media, you have Google, you have Microsoft, you have, in this case, Amazon as well. So there's a lot of different points where your customer is going to be. So it's important that you are able to combine all of that information and then make decisions based on that. So what are some of the things that we encourage you to do? So number 1, make sure that you are tracking web activity. So if you don't have already all of your pixels in place, make sure that you do. Pro tip, use a tag manager. I recommend that you do that, especially if you're working with clients that are a little skeptical.
Oh, Daniel, I think you're muted.
Yep. Sorry about that. Little hiccup here. So especially what I was saying is, especially if you're working with clients that are a little bit skeptical about providing you web access, you can provide access once, install, deploy the tag manager, and then afterwards you can deploy multiple tags through the tag manager without having to request access again. So very important pro tip. If you want to get the tracking right, use a tag manager. That's a key thing. Second thing, and we're not going to go through all of these ones in depth, but for the most part, make sure that you are using the right content strategy as well when it comes to building up your landing pages, having the right forms so that those leads can then be acquired. And then where are you sending this data to? Okay, so now we're going to talk about when it comes to, we already talked a little bit about some of the pieces that you could do in terms of tracking the web activity and then converting that to a lead. But then where do you store that? Is your clients basically using a spreadsheet to keep track of this information? Are you using a spreadsheet to keep track of this information? I mean, that works and that's okay. However, just remember that you have a lot of different tools that you can leverage, such as free CRMs. If you're already, especially if you're a small agency, you could use something like Soho CRM. HubSpot has a free subscription as well, so that you can integrate that with your website. And more importantly, it's just so that you have a centralized place where you can keep track of your leads and then know what are the touch points that you've had with them. Okay. So if you have a customer that's doing that, make sure that you can look into some of those suggestions, because ultimately, if you can keep the data organized, then you can take actionable decisions based on the information that you have. So follow into that. Again, if we talk about some of the common workflows to interact, we're going to then, once you have the leads, you can interact with them by sending them email. So if you're not already using it, let's talk about some of the tools that you could use. If you're using a CRM, most of the CRMs usually have some sort of functionality to email those leads. If not, then you can use something like MailChimp, for example, which again is free. And if you're a bit of a mid-sized agency, a bit of a larger agency, then let's talk about Marketo. Let's talk about, HubSpot obviously has its own email software if you're using Pardot, something along those lines, so that you can keep your prospects engaged and nurtured. Okay. Where you can also use marketing to work on scoring. So for example, I know that some of you may not be familiar with lead scoring in general, but what you want to make sure here is that you can utilize some of these platforms. For example, let's talk about Pardot. So some of the things that I could do with lead scoring is you have a lead that starts at a baseline score of 0, okay? And so then depending on how they interact with your brand, you can actually drive up that score and say that there's certain activities that they can complete that are essentially going to make them warmer or colder, right? And so you could use some of these tools, again, depending on what you have available in your stack, to basically say, okay, well, if they visit a pricing page, then let's up the score by 2 points. If they actually click on one of my emails, then let's up the score by another 2 points. If for some reason they visit some of the key pages or they interact with a brand in some sort of a way, then let's up the scoring. And then eventually you can have some thresholds to say that when the score gets to a certain amount, then you can go ahead and pass it over and it becomes a sales qualified lead. And so what is the takeaway here is that there's a variety of different tools that are out there that you can utilize to basically save time and not pass the lead directly to the sales team, right after it's submitted. Well, again, depending on what kind of submission it was, obviously, if it's a contact form, I need the information now, then of course you send it over. But once it goes cold or there's some sort of a time that goes by, you can use scoring to basically say, okay, well, now we can pass it along, or you can stay in marketing for nurturing and have a few different workflows that are happen around that range. And then again, you could use reporting towards the end once you've actually made them customers, to essentially just continue to use tools in all the different steps of the life cycle. So the key takeaway here is that there's a variety of different platforms out there that you can utilize, and we're going to touch on some of these as we go through the presentation. But most importantly, think of what are some of the things that you're doing today that you're like, man, I wish something did this for me. And most likely the answer is there is something that you can do that for you. And there's a few different tools that are free, and there's other tools where obviously maybe there's a paid component involved, but it can help your agency. And it can also help your customers, and you can instill that behavior to, again, just be more efficient and try to drive more customers. So what are some of the benefits, again, for enhancing your processes through automation? It's, again, you could discover new leads. You could discover new leads by, for example, targeting, let's just say, for example, you do different campaign types that maybe you're not doing today. So just remember that in this case, even though it's not necessarily automation, you could use certain marketing channels to find new leads, and not necessarily the ones that you already have. You can personalize your message. And how can you personalize your message? Well, think of it this way. the way that you can send your nurturing cadences if you're doing email marketing is that you can keep track of where they are. Are they in a consideration stage? Are they in the research stage just now? Where are they? And then based on that, you can trigger different email cadences that speak specifically around what are some of the problems or questions that they could have within that particular step of the journey. So always remember, where is this lead in that buyer journey? And then think of what are the questions that they have that they need to be answered within that stage so that you can personalize your messaging, whether that's messaging on emails, whether that's messaging on ad copy, whether that is messaging, in different ways that you can create touch points with your customers. You can make decisions based on data, as I mentioned. Some of these tools allow you to create if-then scenarios. So it's really simple to say, for example, if the user has seen these pages or it's been this long since they did XYZ, then send this email in particular. Or you can make decisions based on the way that you're performing to then say, okay, well, I've had this many views on this particular ad copy and similar things. So it's just about utilizing the data to make some decisions. And then based on that data, you can also keep marketing and sales in alignment by making sure that the copy speaks the right place and that everyone's very familiar with the process, and obtain more detailed customer profiles. So that's what I would say in general in terms of what are some of the benefits for agencies based on using marketing automation. And Nick, I don't know if you have any comments on some of these points that I touched on.
No, go ahead.
Perfect. So talking about using the buyer journey in your marketing mix. So what's really important, again, we talked about what are our buying stages, right? What are some of the challenges that your prospects are going to have in each of these different stages? Think as them. It's really important to create buyer personas. It's really important to think of, who am I speaking to in this particular point in time? And more importantly, keeping track within your CRM of where these prospects are within that journey. So for example, most CRMs have a field called prospect lifecycle or lifecycle stage. So you can use lifecycle stage, create your own different stages, and then keep track of that. And you can automate that too. So for example, when you just created the lead, they sign up for your newsletter. Okay, well, they're just a subscriber. Okay, well, then now afterwards, they actually downloaded an ebook or they took some action on the website that means that they're a little bit more interested. Then again, you can maybe put them into the consideration stage. And then afterwards, you can put them as a hot lead, for example, ready to buy, something along those lines. And again, trigger things based on the way that you've constructed your content and the way that you've constructed your pages. So it's really important to really think, and it starts from there. It starts from thinking, okay, who am I speaking to? Who are my different buyer personas? What are the different stages that they're going to go through? What are some of the challenges that they're going to have in each of those stages? And then creating content to do that. And so we did some surveys and we did some research, and some of the things that would benefit most people or that they would like to benefit from when it comes to marketing automation, it's improving the targeting of the message. So that's exactly what I'm speaking about. It's to say, okay, well, I'm not going to talk to you about pricing and directly buying if you're still within a research stage. Let's talk about what are some of the, if I'm selling you, for example, a particular set of shoes, maybe it's running shoes for that matter, for example. Okay, well, maybe right now you're just in the consideration stage. So let's talk about maybe doing a little bit of comparison. What are some of the benefits of running shoes? Things of that nature. So your content's a little bit more educational, maybe at the beginning, and then as you kind of get them a little bit closer to the funnel, then you can start to change the way that you approach them. So some of the other things that people are looking forward to within marketing automation is improved customer experience, improving the quality of leads, obviously getting more leads, improved ROI. And how can you achieve that? Because if you think of the ROI in general, you're probably going to invest more as you go. But the important thing is that you're actually getting a return on it. And how can you guarantee that you do that? Is because A, you're making better decisions. You've taken the time to basically research who your customers are, and you're making more mindful approach to the way that you market. You're also probably moving around your budget to different campaign types. So now you've arranged budgets and say, okay, I'm going to invest this much on maybe some display campaigns for consideration. I'm maybe going to invest this much on search. I'm maybe going to invest this much on video, but you're doing a very conscious approach to doing that. And you're using data to change the way that you allocate that budget to, again, just be more efficient than your ROI. Remember, all of those different touch points, they add up. So don't make sure that you're also being very mindful of your attribution models that you're using, to make sure that if you have some touch points on video, but that's not really the campaign that's going to convert, that you're actually giving some of the credit back to that video campaign. So having something in place also to help you with the attribution across different channels is going to be really, really important to make sure that you understand what's driving the ROI, and so that you don't pause the campaign, for example, just because you think it's not really doing anything and it's just giving you traffic, so to speak. Remember, everything plays a part. And so if you have to take the time to look at your entire buyer journey and how different campaigns and different things and different platforms are interacting with that ultimate return on those leads. Obviously, everybody wants higher conversions. They want to be more cost efficient, which is very tied to the ROI. It's just basically another way to word it. And again, increasing traffic and a few more things like that. So let's just recap really quick. Again, map out your buying stages, make sure you have the right messaging for each of the different challenges that your prospects may eventually run into. Make sure that you are choosing technologies that are flexible, that could be integrated with other things. Let me give you an example of something that's free, that's really easy to use. If you've ever used Zapier, or if you haven't heard of Zapier, that's a great alternative as well. You can connect, for example, Sheets with Google Ads. You can connect, for example, Gmail. You can connect MailChimp in there to do certain things. And so if you have a few different tools that are free that maybe don't necessarily speak to one another, you can maybe introduce Zapier in there and then say, okay, well, when we have a new lead, go ahead and add it to a sheet. And then based on that, send an email. And you could do a few different things like that that can integrate. So always think of, okay, what can I do to take a little bit of less time to approach a certain lead and actually make sure that it gets things done pretty quick, right? Because you got to get those leads when they're warm. So don't forget that. All right, let's see what we got here. So talking a little bit about data, right? And, this is, sometimes data can be a little bit overwhelming to some people, especially when we talk about like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and algorithms like that. Like, you don't have to think that they're that complicated. And again, most tools that support this, they'll usually make it really simple for you. So ultimately, as an end user, what's going to happen to you is that it's basically the information is going to be served to you in a silver plate. So all you have to do is look at the data and have a little bit of a notion of what you're looking at. So before, for example, sometimes you have to guess, and this is not really before marketing automation existed. Think of it as something that maybe you're currently dealing with. So maybe right now you don't have any tools. So marketing automation exists, but you as an agency or your customer is not using anything along those lines in terms of marketing tools. So maybe you have to guess whether your leads are hot or cold. You don't know how much they've interacted with the brand. You're basically just blindly blasting emails. And then you're also having your sales team do a lot of cold calling, really, to try to be able to get those leads to convert. And that's time consuming. It's not very efficient. It's going to also create a lot of spirals that are negative within your business, because imagine if I am a sales manager and I keep getting a lot of cold leads to my team. My team's going to complain at some point, and say, hey, Daniel, can we do something about the quality of these leads? And then if I am unaware of how to use some of these tools to better qualify my leads, to better score my leads before I can send them over, then obviously I'm not going to know what to do. So if this sounds like a challenge that you're facing right now, whether it's you, whether it's your client, make sure that you're finding a tool that can help you with this. Because now, as I mentioned before, is you could use certain triggers, whether that's pages that they visited, whether that's emails that they opened, whether that's emails that they clicked on, whether that's content that they downloaded or interacted with. You can use all of that to determine when that lead is becoming warmer, and then send it to your team. So your sales team can be happy, your sales reps can be productive. And then ultimately, when we talk about ROI, that's going to be really, really efficient. So the bottom line here is, again, don't think that the data is going to be this like very daunting thing to do. Most of the tools that you can use that utilize data in some sort of a fashion, they'll usually make it really simple for you to take advantage of that information. So you can automatically take the next step in the funnel, and you can basically determine what are some of the most key interactions or the most valuable interactions that you're having to, again, just make the right step, send it over to sales when it's ready, and keep your sales team happy. That's the key part. All right, so let's talk about boosting sales. Again, this is some of the platforms that we discussed before. I mentioned before, some of the most common automation platforms. Marketo, great tool. I love their demo. Don't use it, but looks good on paper. Dynamic 365. Soho has a free option for CRM. So if you don't have a CRM today, you're still keeping everything on Sheets. Take a look at them. Them and HubSpot have free options. Active campaigns also for email marketing. Adobe has a marketing cloud as well. Salesforce Pardot, that's my jam. We use that ourselves. And so there's a ton, guys. That's kind of the moral of the story. It's like, if you're not using anything, I just want you to use something, all right? Find something, pick a process that's taking you a long time to do, and then let's work together to save you a little bit of time and be more efficient at targeting that. It's really not that complicated. You don't need, a tech magician on your side to be able to implement some of these things. I can promise you that it will make your process a lot, better. So some of the essential components that you want to look into, again, CRMs, marketing automation, and then something to manage your content, which typically for content management, it's usually blended into the marketing piece. So for example, Pardot, when we talk about content management here, it's not necessarily like WordPress. So, that's also technically a content management system, but that's more for like your website. But we mean particularly content management in terms of like marketing content. So like your blogs, or in this case, like your ebooks, your email templates, all of your different nurturing programs that you may have. That's a little bit of what we mean in terms of content management. So make sure you have a good library of that and keep it up to date. Remember, you have to keep your creatives up to date. That's key, right? So don't be sending the same messaging you've been sending for the last 12 months. I hope you're not doing that, please. All right, let's keep going here. So aiming towards bottom funnel. So this is not really something that we are gonna basically spend a lot of time here, but it's just to make sure that you're using the right channels at the right time. And again, here I'm talking about specifically what I'm very familiar with, which is Google, Microsoft, all of the paid advertising in here. But obviously, it's also about using other platforms that are out there. The more platforms that you can be on and have presence on, the better. Again, just make sure that you keep a good eye in terms of the attribution. Make sure that you keep a close eye on not trying to do too many channels at the same time if you're not very familiar with them. So just pick carefully, master one, and then move on to the next. But for the most part, it's just about understanding one more time, okay, where is my prospect in the buyer journey? And then make sure that we kind of try to bring them down slowly through different touch points, right? And understand that every campaign is going to behave a little bit different depending on what your goal is. So if my goal is just basically to get people to consider the product, whether I am in the middle of the funnel and I'm trying to show them a little bit more about maybe doing product comparison, or later in the journey so that they actually want to buy, remember that the way that you evaluate success on each of these campaigns is going to be very different. So, and this goes back to what I was saying before. It's just because your video campaign doesn't have the most conversions doesn't mean that it's not very effective. Just because your display campaign, doesn't have the conversion rate that your search does, doesn't mean you have to let go of it. So remember that you have to measure things differently depending on what their objectives are, and not all of the campaigns and not all of the platforms have the same objective. So be mindful of that and remember that everything plays a part. So again, if we're talking about early, just consideration, it's all going to be about reach. How many people are we able to get to? Once you get a little bit lower, it's okay, how efficient is the messaging? So is my message really being, let's say, considered by the user? So is it relevant to them? And that's going to be measured through cost per click, CTR, primarily CTR here, I would say, for the most part. So if I have a really, really low CTR, maybe I'm not picking the right audience. Maybe my messaging is not going very well. Maybe I have to take a look at which audiences I picked. Again, depending on what campaign that might be. And then once I get a little bit lower down the funnel, then of course conversions is going to be what you're interested in. And then just make sure you pick the right conversion. So if I am an e-commerce store, obviously leads, like contact forms are going to be okay, but that's going to be like a secondary goal. Obviously your primary goal is going to always be transactions, but it doesn't mean you can't really track some of those forms, newsletter subscriptions and things like that, but that would maybe be more of a secondary goal. So choose the right campaign type, choose the right targeting, make sure that your messaging and your offers are resonating at each different stage. And again, use bidding strategies that efficiently use your budget, or to rephrase that a little bit, make sure you pick the bidding strategy that best accommodates your goals in that particular buyer funnel. So if I'm using a display campaign, I might probably not use maximize conversions because that's not really what the objective is. So maybe I want to use, maximize clicks as an example. So again, your metrics are different, therefore your bidding strategies are different. Don't think that you're going to use the same bidding strategy for all of your different campaigns. And this is again very specific to Google. And again, the same thing is going to happen when you look in Facebook, and your campaign objectives are going to determine the way that you bid. And if you talk about other platforms, for example, if you're going to do Amazon advertising, which we're going to see in a second, then of course, again, you want to be mindful of kind of what your metrics are. All right, let's keep going here. And then last but not least, if you are doing so many different places or platforms, you're using all of these things at the same time, it's really important to have the right attribution, number one. And then number two, that you're able to actually tell a compelling story to your customers in terms of how the results are, right? And so make sure that you have some sort of a dashboard. And again, ideally, you're not doing your reports in Google Sheets. Please. Nothing wrong with it, but I'm just saying it's probably taking you forever to get it done. So Data Studio is fine. I like Data Studio. Data Studio is good. If you're not using Data Studio, hopefully you're using some sort of another platform for PPC reporting. There's a ton out there. This is actually a couple of screenshots from something that we're working on ourselves. No shameless plug, but for the most part, what you want to make sure of is that there's clarity in the data that you're showing to your customers, that there's not a ton of text, but also not just a ton of numbers, right? Make sure that you keep a very nice balance between the main metrics and then also having some commentary to show your customer what those numbers actually mean. So always make sure that you don't pick just all of the different metrics from Google. If you've ever looked into it, just in case you want to know, there's over 100 metrics that you could put in there. Imagine trying to do a report with 100 metrics. That would be pretty boring, right? And as a customer, there's this thing called couldn't say that, eh? Paralysis by analysis. It would have been really cool if I would have said it right the first time, but you get what I mean. So imagine if you give your customer just a ton of metrics for them to basically make their own decisions or make their own analysis. It's going to take them forever, and they're probably just not going to look at the report. So always make sure that it's your responsibility to choose what metrics are important to your customer based on the objectives that they convey to you. So make sure that there's a purpose behind the metrics that you're choosing. Not every report's going to be the same because all of your customers are different. And then again, choose a format that's going to be appropriate. Make sure that there's enough space in between there. And again, use some tools that can help you save some time to put this reports together. So Nick, anything you want to add to reporting pieces? But I'm sure we also will cover some of that with you later.
Yeah. No. I mean, just what comes to mind is just how complex I think your type of marketing is, because there's so many different platforms that you're interacting with, so many different points of engagement. Whereas I think, comparing it to Amazon, there are differences that to account for, but the fact that it's in a closed ecosystem, you don't have to worry about attribution as much, makes things a little more, simplistic, I guess, which is good for us.
Yeah, that's true. But it's the fun of it, actually. We really enjoy that. It is a challenge in itself, but it makes it really cool to be able to try to create those stories for our customers, and then be able to tell that. So yeah, I agree with that. So it's time for the good stuff here. So I'm going to hand it over.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Nick here. We're going to talk about one of the most important platforms for your e-commerce clients. So if you're not already on Amazon, it's time for you to get started, please. All right. So Nick, go ahead, take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. Very enlightening. So guys, really excited to just give you a quick overview about Amazon management success. As I mentioned earlier, we've been selling on Amazon since 2014, and Amazon is one of the fastest growing, I think, if not the fastest growing ad platform out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over just, an overview of, how we approach selling on Amazon and just giving context so that you have better understand how to manage Amazon advertising for your clients. So, first off, the way you sell matters. It's really important. And just like how you approach any kind of marketing strategy, you have to really understand the Amazon customer journey, how customers buy on Amazon in order to formulate a proper approach to advertising for your clients. So in terms of dominating the Amazon marketplace, and this actually not only applies to Amazon, it applies to Walmart, it applies to any search engine based e-commerce marketplace, right? Essentially, they all act like Google. I always say that, just like how Google is a search engine for information, Amazon is a search engine for products. But there are certain key factors to keep in mind that Google might not have. And really it comes down to 4 key material points, which is, having a clear market research behind the offer and the product that you're selling and the unique selling proposition. What makes Amazon different as opposed to kind of the marketing that Daniel was talking about is that it's a comparative platform, meaning 75% of purchases on Amazon happen when customers are typing in a non-branded keyword, meaning shoes or shoelaces, right? They're not looking for a specific brand. And that means now you're comparing your product against other offers in the search results. So making sure that you understand what keywords you're targeting and how you're comparing against those competitors from a pricing standpoint and a unique selling proposition standpoint is going to be key to understanding why your ads are performing well or not. Next is also establishing social proof through reviews. That's a critical factor. If you just think about when you're buying anything on Amazon or through any marketplace, reviews are the first thing you look at, right? And so being able to make sure that you have good review rating and working with your clients to ensure that they have that is going to be critical. I've had so many prospects that I've talked to where they have like a 3-star product and they ask if I can help. And honestly, it's incredibly difficult to make that work. The difference of, your conversion rate between a 3-star or a 5-star product is massive. So making sure you have that in order is going to be key to also ensuring that you're driving success for your advertising. Next is just optimize SEO and searchability for relevance. So, this is where it's really similar to Google in that the more optimized your listing is, according to the keyword research that you've done, the more you're going to show up in index for those important keywords. And so that's where we talk about relevance a lot in the Amazon world, right? If your listing isn't relevant, and that's either shown through the content and also shown through how customers interact with your ad placement, that's going to determine whether or not you get more exposure for those organic keywords that are relevant to your product. And then finally, this is where the advertising comes in, making sure that you understand the customer buyer journey on Amazon and that you have specific ad types and goals across each of those buyer stages. Could you go to the next slide, Daniel?
Yeah, for sure. One question I did have for you though, Nick, and enlighten me here. So when you do the market research for these campaigns on Amazon, how different is that from like doing market research and keyword research for, let's say, a paid search campaign on Google? Do you use very similar tool sets, or what is your train of thought and process for that?
I would say it would be similar. We would use some kind of like Google Keyword Planner tool. Amazon's version is called Brand Analytics. But on top of that, there's something that's unique in that there's something called a reverse ASIN search. And an ASIN is essentially just like a unique identifier for any product on Amazon. And there are a lot of tools out there that you can use, like Helium 10 or Ecom Analytics. That's one that I use right now that I think is pretty good. You basically plug in a competitor ASIN, and which is why I always say competitive research is important. And then you can find all the keywords that product is listed for. And you can use that as a starting point of understanding, okay, well, where are they getting their conversions? Where are they getting their sales? And what keyword clusters do I need to compete on? So that's kind of, I think, the difference. We include competitive research on top of the keyword research, which provides us more insight into what the right keywords are, right? So that's I guess, the differences between the two.
Perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying
Sure.
that.
Okay, so let's go over these stages because I think, again, I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with, the buyer stages. They're kind of similar across all different kinds of advertising, but with Amazon in particular, there's a different approach in how we go about it. So obviously it starts from awareness all the way to purchase. I'm just walking through kind of the circumstances. And I like to think about it in terms of what is a customer doing right at this stage. So if it's an awareness stage, customer has no idea about your brand or doesn't have a desire for the product. So that means maybe they're passively watching TV, browsing their phone, looking at social media, reading the news. Interest, they are shoppers who are likely to, but have not yet engaged with your brand or product. In their stage, they're interested in the product or category, but they're not aware of your brand, right? And so it's really about educating them about your brand. Consideration stage, I want to buy a product, I'm aware of your brand, but I'm comparing your product against others. And then finally, purchase stage, that's going to be, I'm literally on your product detail page, and I'm deciding whether I want to purchase it or not. So going through all these stages is really important. Obviously over here, we have a bunch of different metrics that we're looking at. But what I like to say is that Amazon is really unique in that it is more of a bottom of a funnel type platform. Because if you think about it, customers are typing in what they want to purchase. There's a high intent to purchase based off of those keywords. And there's not really a lot of discoverability that's involved with shopping on Amazon. And so for that reason, what we like to do is always evaluate, well, how optimized is our client at each of these stages? Because it doesn't make sense if at the purchase stage and you're not retail ready, your conversion rate on your listing is poor. We're not going to try to drive more advertising and more traffic because that's just a waste of spend. So understanding where your customer or your client is super critical. If a client is really mature, for instance, and they've already really maxed out, in terms of being top of search for all the primary keywords, that's when we'll start considering using things like, DSP, that's their demand side platform. And that's where we're really investing in more awareness and display ads. But really, we want to first focus bottom of the funnel and work our way up. And that might mean, first saying, hey, okay, well, your listing isn't optimized. Your content isn't optimized. We're seeing really poor conversion rates when we're benchmarking against other products in this category. Focus on that first. Then you use these metrics to evaluate, okay, how efficient are we within the stage? Then you move yourself upwards. Because what's going to happen is, as you drive more relevance at each stage, it's going to drive overall better performance. And what I like to say is that Amazon has a relevance tax, and I think it's very similar to what Google has, where if your product isn't relevant, your ads are just going to be much more expensive. So it really just doesn't make sense for us to start at all disparate stages. And it's super important to inform the client and really have a honest conversation about what needs to be prioritized first in order to maximize the best results for them over the long term. So so I'll keep going into the next slide. So again, I think, what's really important to know is that, and I've been touching on this in the last couple slides, is that again, advertising is just one piece of the pie when it comes to Amazon. There's so many other aspects to take into consideration. And so it's important to also understand that content plays a major role, right, in driving advertising performance. If you think about it, you don't have as much creative freedom when it comes to Amazon, because really what customers are looking at when you're running sponsored products, maybe you've seen it where you type in a product, you see it, just a listing, it looks like a normal listing, but it says sponsored, right? That's someone paying to get visibility. But the problem is that you don't really have as much creative freedom in that situation. All you have and what you can share with the customer is really the main image in that search result, your reviews, and your price point, right? And that's all they're looking at to make the decision as to whether they want to click into your ad or not. And so that's why content plays such a critical role. For us personally, we invest a lot into things like polling campaigns using a platform like PickFu. We have our own internal system, but that allows us to actually plug in competitors into these polls and actually comparatively test, well, why does one image perform better than the other? And what insights can we get from these polls to actually make improvements to the main image, which is going to drive better click-through rate. And more click-through rate is, or higher click-through rate is going to drive better relevance, cheaper advertising, and more overall exposure. So that's why content is such an integrated part of how to drive the best performance for the advertising. Inventory planning is also a critical factor because now we know from the data that we've seen that if you have less than 4 to 6 weeks of inventory at any given point in time, Amazon is going to place you for less spots just because they want to make sure that you're in stock for as long as possible to drive a better customer experience for shoppers. And so what's going to happen is that you're not good at consistently maintaining inventory. And it's a metric that you can track on Amazon called IPI. Then over the long term, you're going to get less visibility as a result. And so making sure that you have that handled is going to be critical to making sure that your advertising is performing at its best possible. You're not going to be able to drive sales and you're going to have to build yourself back when you run out of stock. So maintaining inventory is critical to ensuring that, you're not losing momentum with your advertising. And finally, operations. When I talk about operations, what I mean is there's a lot of shit that can just happen on Amazon where your listing just goes down, for whatever reason, the content gets deleted. it's just, for lack of a better word, sometimes a shit show when it comes to Amazon. And so being able to make sure that your client has the resources to be able to resolve those issues quickly is going to ensure that that listing is up for as consistently as possible, so that you're not losing momentum and traction on your advertising. And so, as you can tell, just based off this conversation, a lot of performance is predicated on how consistently you can actually keep your listing up, and how you're optimizing those key factors from the search results page. And so we look at it as like an Amazon marketing flywheel. The better you can manage your operations, the better you can manage your inventory planning, the better you can manage your content, and the better your advertising is going to perform. And so that's really our full approach. We're not just advertising. We handle everything turnkey, because we know that one factor impacts the other significantly. And to be able to drive the best performance and exposure, we need to control all these very closely. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Nick. I just wanted to say that, what does your onboarding process look like? When you're trying to bring on new customers on board, like, what is your qualifying, let's say, criteria? Because it sounds like, if it's a small customer and they don't really, they look like they probably won't have inventory ready, very quickly.
Yeah.
Like if you advertise hard, they're gonna run out, and maybe they don't have as much content. Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Onboarding, I feel like, is something we're always trying to improve. I think we've got a good process now, but always room for improvement, as you guys know. But I would say that, we try to break it out in these 4 sections, and we have a deep questionnaire for each of those sections to really pinpoint, understand where are they, right? And so what do we need to do? What does like square one look like? And are they close to it? Are they at that? Or do we need to get them to that place so that we can start applying our standard processes and approaches? So I think what we try to do is, if they don't have any of these parts figured out, this is a bare minimum. We'll fix those issues first, pause on advertising. And it may take a month or 2 before we actually start ramping up our advertising for our clients, because we need to get all these different things in order. And so what I would say is that keep that in mind as you have clients. Some of you guys might just only be advertising agencies, but I think where you can really add value is really giving feedback to the client about these different aspects and really educating them about that content. Because I see a lot of advertising agencies or clients that come from pure advertising agencies that come to us, and they were never advised on the fact that, okay, well, your main image isn't performing well because when you're comparing yourself against these other products, it just isn't a great value or a great offer that's immediately visible. And so, a lot of it comes from just troubleshooting and coming up with a plan of, okay, what needs to be fixed now so that in 3 months we can just ramp up very quickly. And that's kind of what our onboarding process looks like ultimately.
That's really cool. That's really cool. All right, let's move on to the next one here.
Okay. And so moving into, I guess, the gist of the topic, which is advanced sales reporting and automation. So, when you're starting to manage clients at scale, Amazon has a great campaign manager. It's pretty good. There are some decent tools, but at some point, once you start scaling, I think it's a good idea to start considering like automation platforms that you can use. Now, there are different types of automation platforms. There's one, we use one called PackView. Another one that's similar to PackView is called IntentWise. And there's another platform called like Perpetua and Quartile. They're kind of split into 2. One is full automation. Another one is like guided rule-based automation. PackView is rule-based automation. Now, I always recommend using rule-based automation simply because, these completely, hands-off automation tools are not going to be sufficient enough in really driving towards specific goals for your clients. A lot of times they're just based around efficiency, right, for the overall count. But that's not custom enough for clients, in my opinion, because each product might have different goals, right? And so if you're applying an overall efficiency metric to the account, is that really the best metric to tackle? Because keep in mind that your advertising isn't only going to be the sole source of your sales. The goal of advertising is really to drive organic visibility. And organic visibility is going to drive full price purchases, right? In terms of you locking in full margin. And so really we see advertising as a way to drive more organic rank. And organic rank is really where we drive the bulk of our sales and our profit. And so in order to, and each category is going to be different because each category has different efficiency benchmarks. And so understanding that is really critical and important, which is why if you just have a hands-on platform, you're not going to really be able to drive towards the goals and the outcomes in a customized way that's beneficial for your client. And so you can see here, here's an example of a dashboard that PackView has. And tools like PackView allow you to pull information from disparate sources that are actually really hard to compile from Amazon. Surprisingly, Amazon makes it difficult to actually pull information, and at some point we had to use Google Sheets to compile it all together, which I know Daniel hates. And so we realized, okay, this is a waste of time. And that's why we went with PackView. And so PackView allows you to pull all this stuff, even things like PPC conversion rates, that's stuff that Amazon doesn't have, and things like TACOS, which is total advertised cost of sales, which is basically a blended ROAS inversed. And so these are things that the advertising platform doesn't give you, but PackView allows you to see. And so from a top-down glance, it allows us to really, track really important metrics like click-through rate, conversion rate, which are really important ones that we look at to evaluate, relevance, but also, performance. And then the other thing is it allows us to really at scale to drive great naming or good naming convention hygiene. And that's really important as well, because as you start, creating exclusive campaigns for exclusive keywords, having that naming convention is going to allow you to really quickly organize things and even tag campaigns so that you can apply custom rules to those campaigns that have specific tags. And so finally, rule automations, I touched on this as well, is that it allows us to create scalable systems for optimizing campaigns for different purposes, whether it's growth, efficiency. So as we work with a client, we might have a stock rule that we can customize and now apply to our client. And now we can apply to all the tags within a specific campaign, or all the keywords with the specific tag. There's a lot of different ways that we can go about it. But again, it really allows our team to be a lot more strategic rather than always focus on just bid optimizations. There's a lot more that goes into it beyond that. And so, it even breaks it out in terms of customer, funnel and customer journey. And that allows us to also gain visibility into, specific metrics like new to brand sales, impressions, viewable shares, a lot of metrics I could get into. But ultimately, I highly recommend working with a rule-based, automation software. I think a more cost-efficient or cost-effective solution might be something like Scale Insights. So again, tools that I would recommend would be like PackView, Scale Insights, IntentWise, definitely when you're looking to manage your advertising at scale for clients. So that's pretty much it, Daniel. Yeah, hopefully that was a quick but insightful overview for your audience.
No, I appreciate that very much, and I think it's really interesting how some of the things that you were saying connect to what we were discussing before. The fact that you're not just choosing one goal specifically for the account, but you're rather saying, okay, well, based on what the objectives are for the customer, and then probably also trickle down to the specific campaign types that you're doing, that then you say, okay, well, I want these rules to do this or that based on the specific KPIs that you have in terms of that specific one. So I think that's very, very important.
Totally.
So we're going to open up the floor here. We don't have a ton of time left, but we wanted to make sure that if anybody has any questions, you guys can use the Q&A portion within this webinar. So if anybody has any questions directed towards Nick, towards me, then by all means, go ahead and lay it down there for us to basically review. So one of the questions that we got outside, and again, if anybody has another one, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the Q&A box or the chat box. Let me see, what do we have here? So I'm having a hard time with my email campaigns. My emails are going to the spam folder. Do you know a warm up email app? Well, Melba, thank you very much for the question. I think that's actually a very, very common issue where you're basically going to do some email campaigns and you're going to start hitting the spam box. Number one, I think it's very important that you're very considerate about the volume that you're sending at a time. That's the first part that I would say. Don't do at the beginning. When we started doing emails, we were doing campaigns of 10,000 at a time, and then that was definitely a mistake. So just make sure that you're a little bit more mindful of the sending volume. Number two, I would say that it's really important to take a look at the way that you've acquired your subscriptions, because let's just say, for example, I'm not saying you're doing that, but I have seen it before in some other areas and other marketing companies that I have worked with or consulted with, where they have actually done cold emailing. So if you started your list with the cold emails and you basically just purchased a list of leads, and then you're basically reaching out to them right off the bat, they've never heard of you. So they're probably going to start saying, hey, this is spam. And then if that was the way that you started, maybe you've changed now, maybe you've done a bit of a more warm approach, but that's how you originally started and you're still using the same IP sending address, then essentially you're probably going to continue to see your emails go to spam depending on how you approach people in the beginning. And then I would say the third thing that you consider, that's also really important, is again, if you're already facing this issue, the easiest way to maybe resolve that is if you have an email vendor ask for IP address change, you can actually change from a shared IP address, which is mostly the case, to a dedicated IP address for sending. So if you start off with a new IP address, you can build up your reputation from the beginning. There's some pros and cons to doing both, because if you're using a shared one and you happen to share it with people that are doing and following good email practices, then that's technically already warm. So there's some benefits to that. On the negative side, again, if you've already kind of tainted your reputation, then you're probably better off starting from scratch. So I think that would be, what I would recommend.
Can I chime in on this one, Daniel?
Yeah, for sure.
So we've definitely gone on the cold email side.
I saw you smiling. I saw you smiling.
Clients. Yeah. So I don't know if this is kind of in relation to what you're asking, Melba, but there are definitely tools out there. Lemlist is one of them. Mail Warmer is another, where you can warm up an email. I would definitely recommend that if you are doing cold emails, though, just like what Daniel said, it does pose a big risk to your main domain, right? So for instance, ours is marketplaceops.com. We purchased marketplaceops.co, marketplaceops.us. And you can use those, create a separate Gmail for those accounts. And you can, have the domain forward to your main domain, right? And so that way, at least you're not screwing up association with your other IP, your other domain. And I would recommend, if you feel like you're going to spam ready, maybe restart potentially or do what Daniel said. But then, really put like a couple emails on like a mail warm cycle for like 3 months, let's say. And now you've kind of established that. But beyond that, when you're sending these emails, if you are doing cold emails, make sure your emails are customized to a certain degree. And you can use these tools to actually, customize the subject line based off the information that you've pulled from a lead list. Same thing in your, your body. Customize some of it, because they're going to pick up very quickly if it's just a standard template, and then you're going to get flagged. But the more customized it is, just like click-through rate, right? The more relevant it is to the person that you're reaching out to, the less likely it's going to be flagged as spam. And the more customized it is, the less likely that Google is going to automatically flag it as spam. So just some things to consider.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really important. I mean, if you have "Dear Sir," on that subject line, it's going to go to spam right away. So second question, this is actually for you here, Nick.
Yeah.
So how much would it cost to advertise on Amazon? And I know that's a bit of an open-ended question here, because it really depends, but I'll let you go for it.
Yeah. So if you're talking about just purely advertising, like a single product, I always say that, if you're launching a brand new product with no history, you want to allocate around $200 to $300 a day in ad spend for the first, let's say, 2 months. And the reason why, as it is with any ad platform, you want to test as many ad types, you want to test a lot of keywords. And, from that point, if you spend that much, you'll be able to see what's working and what's not. So generally, that's what I recommend. And depending on performance, you scale up or scale down from there. So that's generally what I would recommend. That comes out to, let's just call it like, anywhere from $6,000 to $9,000 a month in ad spend. Obviously, you can go lower, but it's just going to be a longer timeline before you understand where that kind of peak velocity is for your sales.
Yep. That's very interesting, Nick. And I think it's most, you can consider as a cost of R&D, really, right? I mean, it's more so just investing on that, and at the end of the day, setting the expectations that afterwards, of course, the ROI could be there, depending on how the performance goes. So very, very good. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here on the chat? Okay, that was Melba saying thank you, very awesome, and good, very nice. I think outside of that, let me see, how are we doing on time here? So one other question is, what are the basic services that you recommend offering for Amazon management as an agency? So, for example, some of the viewers here, they're maybe doing social media, maybe they're doing SEO, so they're considering maybe doing Amazon. And I think this is very tied to what you said earlier about not just being an ad agency, but also focusing on maybe providing some consultations and some other handholding to the client. So, if you were to recommend, some top level, let's say, services that an agency would be able to add to their Amazon portfolio, like what would those be?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say, if you had to distill it, I would say content and advertising, right? Those two play really directly hand in hand. And so the content in your listing is going to directly impact your advertising. So I think that's going to be like a direct need pretty, immediately. Generally, when we work with brands, they don't just have Amazon as a channel, they're omni-channel. And so they already have an inventory planning team, but maybe they're just not as familiar with how Amazon works, but they can learn it. So I'd say, if you don't want to offer full service content, which would include like the copywriting, the keyword optimization, the market research, and also the image optimization, that's going to play directly in the performance of your advertising, because the better that you understand the people that you're competing with, the better you'll be able to advertise and know who to target and what keywords to target. So I think those two really play hand in hand.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. And would you say that, for example, if we were to look at, kind of what you guys do with Marketplace Ops, and some of the other agencies in the market, is that what sets you guys apart? Is that like your strategic differentiator, would you say?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, our background is we've launched at least 300 of our own products, right? So we have a deep familiarity of understanding, from testing so many different variables. And yeah, I would say it comes from that experience where we understand, okay, optimizing and actually running polling before we even go live helps shortcut the cycle of when we start getting a payback period for our products. So that's, I think, a big differentiator. A lot of agencies won't do that. They won't even do content, right? And if it plays such a big part, you're really not optimizing for the best outcome. So, really, again, like, just think about it this way: you're shopping on Shopify, you're on that site, you're just looking at the image, right? You just want to know more about the product. But when you're on Amazon, you're comparing constantly. And that main image is the first point of contact right on a page of other products. It's literally a shelf. So you really have that small opportunity and window to capture that. And so I just feel like not enough emphasis is really put on that specific, I guess, stage or that customer action, I would say.
I agree with that 100%. And most importantly, I think that sets your agency up for failure, because you're not going to provide the right service to the client, and ultimately you're setting up the client for failure as well. Because if you're just doing the advertising piece, you're just basically optimizing the bids and putting the money in there, keeping an eye on the campaign, you're not really going full circle, then you're not really driving the right performance, and ultimately that's going to cost your lifetime value with those customers too. So I think that's very important. Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Nick. I think we're basically running out of time here. It's been incredible to have you on. I really appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
I think there was we had some good attendees today. So to everyone that joined, we appreciate you. We'll see you on the next one. And then Nick, have a fantastic day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you too.